Hi everyone, I'm very happy and glad to have Sebastian Stenzel with me here in Alnadi podcast for a great interview. Hi, Sebastian.
Hi, Fadil. Thanks for inviting me.
Yeah, I'm very happy really to start with the biography, and I leave it to you. And I have many things to discuss with you. Actually, vast experience to be discussed here.
Um, well, I don't know how interesting my biography really is, but uh, for me, there are 2 points that maybe are important for my work as an instrument maker. And one is that as a child, I had a lot of time to myself. I was I had school in the morning, of course, but in the afternoons, I was mostly left to myself, to my own devices, to follow my own interests.
Hmm.
And and the other point is that there were many of such interests.
Hmm.
I was, as a child, I was very much interested in nature, for one thing. That might be because I grew up right next to a forest, and so I spent a lot of time in the forest, and to me that felt almost like a second home.
Hmm.
I just felt very much at home in the forest with the trees and everything. So much so that uh, uh, my mother had a hard time to bring me to wear any other clothes that were not brown or green,
Hmm.
because I wanted to kind of camouflage. I wanted to melt in with the forest.
Hmm.
Anyhow, but the other main interest for me was in all kinds of crafts,
Hmm.
and I always wanted to understand how things are being made and how things work.
Hmm.
So, for example, one time in my childhood, I became interested in baskets.
Hmm.
So I tried to find out how baskets were made and started to make some baskets. Or I was interested in how cloth were made. So I ended up sewing my own pants and other things.
Hmm.
Or I learned even knitting socks and such stuff.
Hmm.
But the most important was always working with wood.
Hmm.
And my father had a small workbench in our basement in the cellar. And I spent a lot of time there trying to make things, also without anyone really teaching me. But it gave me a certain confidence that I could make things somehow.
Hmm.
And um, well, or an example for trying to understand how things work is my father had a drill machine which was not functioning anymore. So he gave it to me to slaughter it because he knew I was interested to open things and see how what was inside and how it worked.
Yeah.
So I completely disassembled this drill machine, and I couldn't find anything wrong with it. It all looked to be okay. So I put it together again, and there was one part left over, and I couldn't remember where it went,
Hmm.
and I didn't even know what it was.
Hmm.
Now I know it was a capacitator to avoid humming in the radio,
Uh-huh.
and but because I didn't know where it went, so I just left it out, and to my surprise, the machine worked again,
Hmm.
and I used it for many years.
With the capacitor aside.
Right, and probably with the neighbors being annoyed that whenever I used it, they had humming in their radio. But
Yeah, interesting.
all that also when I was a bit older, I was building radios myself and transmitters. So I became interested in electronics,
Mm.
and which later helped me a lot with acoustics because it's basically the same things.
Mhm.
And and well, then I got also interested in the arts. I was painting, I was doing photography as a teenager.
Mhm.
And when I was about to finish school, I had no idea really what I wanted to do. In fact, to make a decision about a profession felt like uh, an inevitable loss
Mm.
because it felt to me like choosing one would means to let go of all my other interests.
Mhm.
And my idea after finishing school was to study physics.
Mhm.
That had been my main subject in the last 2 years of school, and I was quite good at it. And so
Mm.
it felt like natural to just go on and study physics.
Yeah.
But I actually went to the university and sat in some lectures, and it didn't appeal to me at all.
Mm.
And and I just didn't feel like it's the right thing to do, so I didn't.
Mhm.
And instead, I have to admit, mainly for lack of a better idea, I
Mhm.
started to study Chinese medicine in traditional Chinese medicine in California.
Mhm.
And but I didn't want to stay there and came back to Germany only after half a year
Mhm.
with the idea to continue with that somehow in Europe.
Mhm.
But then fate took over, or
Mm.
whatever it was,
Mhm.
and I was steered back into instrument making,
Mm.
which I had dabbled in, you could say, already as a teenager.
Mhm.
I made my first instruments when I was 12 years old,
Mhm.
and I think when I was 13, I even made a small guitar without having any idea what I was doing or what it was about. I just tried to do it,
Mhm.
and and uh, and uh, I was taking guitar lessons, classical guitar, and my guitar teacher actually, when he saw this first guitar I made with at the age of 13,
Mm.
he recommended that I should enroll in a school
Mm.
for instrument making after uh, having finished my school, and but I never took that seriously
Mhm.
until when I came back from California. I ran into a guitar maker
Mhm.
which happened to have a provisory workshop just round the corner from where I lived at the time in Munich,
Mhm.
and just following an impulse, I just went inside and I asked him if he would apprentice me, and he laughed and he said no. And but we had a nice chat, and I left after half an hour
Mhm.
with the very strong feeling that this was my future. He actually, even though he said no, he would apprentice me.
Mhm.
And and well, then to make a long story short, I was kind of using every excuse to just drop by and say hello and kind of remind him that I was still interested if any
Mhm.
possibility opened.
Mm.
And since I was looking for a new place to stay, I couldn't give him a firm address or telephone number.
Mhm.
And so I gave him my father's telephone number to reach me in case he would change his mind.
Mhm.
And at that time, I was living from driving taxi in Munich and doing some occasional carpentry jobs with a friend.
Mhm.
And this friend had the idea to start a business uh, uh, to make interior design and furniture in Japanese style. And he
Mhm.
asked me if I would start such a business with him. And but I had somehow gotten my teeth into that idea of guitar making. And so I asked him for a few days time to make up my mind.
Mhm.
And on the weekend, I was free to really think about it. And I took a big piece of paper and and wrote pro and con on top and started to make a list of arguments
Mhm.
to either start this business with him or to go for guitar making on my own and just started self-taught.
Mhm.
And while I was sitting there writing, the phone rang,
Mhm.
and it was the guitar maker, and he said I could start my apprenticeship.
Wow.
And that was really unbelievable, actually. But this is exactly how it happened.
Mhm.
And and I always felt like that my work was under a lucky star, as it were. It was always
Mhm.
things were somehow working out for me with the people I met
Mhm.
and
Interesting. Maybe we pause here,
yes,
Sebastian,
of
and
course.
go back to the growing up time. I would like to go back to the forest, go back to the ideas of religion, thoughts, skepticism, because I know you have a very good thing in there to discuss.
Do I? Okay.
Yeah, so I mean, I could see the skepticism is there in manufacturing or maybe making the ouds or the guitars, the way you see science or schooling, and the way you raise is like very independent. For example, I could even notice maybe lack of patience, or
Well,
maybe a realization that maybe this is not good enough to continue and put some investment in. The example of physics or schooling or maybe Chinese medicine.
yeah,
Mm.
absolutely. I was always very impatient, actually,
Mm.
and it in my work, my work needs a lot of patience,
Mm-hmm.
and I somehow learned to have that patience with my work.
Mm.
But when I was a child, uh, I remember it happened so many times that something I was making fell apart because I didn't have the patience to wait for the glue to set.
Mm-hmm.
And and sometimes the same happens, which
Mm.
reminds me of how impatient I really am.
Mm-hmm.
But not when I make instruments. I somehow learned to control myself in that respect
Mm-hmm.
when I build instruments.
Uh-huh.
And and it's uh, I think what you hinted at is that I was never interested in just copying things. I wanted to understand how things
Mm-hmm.
work, how they function, how they are made,
Mm-hmm.
and then make my own version of it, as it were.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yeah.
and it's I don't know why that is so, but I think anybody who has done any kind of creative work will agree that there is nothing to replace that when to be really creative. I'm convinced that all human beings do have the need to be creative in some kind, some field, some kind of way. And
Mm-hmm.
there is, of course, there are no limits to ways you can be creative.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm convinced that if you don't give yourself the possibility to be creative, you will become sick,
Mm-hmm.
either physically or mentally.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's just from my experience. And when you have had the taste of true creativity, of really working uh, in the flow, as the psychologists call it now,
Mhm.
uh, where you are totally concentrated on the process without your ego really being involved.
Mhm.
That is you won't give that up for anything.
Mhm.
It's just too good.
Yeah, interesting. And I could feel, for example, when you mentioned that you did your first guitar, or maybe you tried a lot of things on your own without a previous training or apprenticeship. That also shows the muscle of research, questioning, finding out your way into whatever knowledge or skill you would like to require for succeeding at one of these problem solving issues.
Um, well, I would say yes and no. Uh, um, I'm a great fan of common sense.
Mm,
I think it's very good to do research and to really uh, uh, to do your homework, let's say.
mm-hmm,
But the most important thing, in my opinion, is that you have a good common sense
mm-hmm,
and really question everything. Okay, does this make sense, or what am I doing here, or what is this research really about? Does it make sense what they are calculating there? And and I found that when you really look at scientific research papers, let's say for example in acoustics,
mm-hmm,
you usually find that in the end they are very unprecise,
mm-hmm,
and because uh, uh, they always use models, and these models are always simplified models, of course,
mm-hmm,
and and then they come to a point. um, Let me give you a simple example. If you calculate the modes of vibration of a soundboard,
mm-hmm,
it's it's um, it's quite a simple equation, similar to the one used to calculate string frequencies,
mm-hmm,
and 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 but in this equation there is a factor, and this factor, how is it derived? It simply is derived by comparing the measured results with the calculated results.
mm-hmm.
So the calculation is made to fit with the reality.
Yes,
You could say it's, to put it badly, you could say it's rigged. It's a cheap trick.
yes,
That means you have this scientific formula, the equation, which appears to be a very precise thing,
mm-hmm,
but in reality, it's only reflecting a thought process showing the interrelation of the different parameters involved.
yeah,
And that is what is the valuable thing about it.
mm,
I don't think there is any great value in being capable. Let's say I make an oud
mm,
and I'm capable to calculate the the mode frequencies of the soundboard or whatever.
mm-hmm,
It's for me that as such doesn't mean anything.
mm,
It only means something to when you understand why certain frequencies or certain modes might be more important than others,
mm-hmm,
and and that means you have to understand the what's really going on.
mm-hmm,
And I, I was very lucky in a way to learn a little bit of basic acoustics and physics.
mm-hmm,
So I actually could make some sense of the work of the acousticians.
mm-hmm,
and 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 I think I could make more sense of their work than they could themselves because they were lacking the
Hmm.
understanding of an instrument maker.
Yeah.
And on the other hand, many instrument maker are just working by intuition and experience, and there's nothing wrong with it. I have
Hmm.
actually the longer I work, and I'm making instruments for 30 years now professionally,
Hmm.
more than 30 years. It's I really have a great respect for tradition,
Hmm.
and I see instruments almost as if there were beings
Hmm.
or entities which seem to have a life of their own. I mean,
Hmm.
when um, an oud or a guitar, nobody really knows where it came from. I mean, we have all these historic research, and we find these stone reliefs in what's now Afghanistan from the first century Christian calendar, and showing something which might be an oud or barbat, and we have uh, um, well, actually, the violin family is a much better family, a much better example.
Hmm.
There have been all kinds of bowed instruments in Middle Ages or so, but then in this late 16th century, suddenly whoosh, there is the violin, the viola, the cello. It's I find that very fascinating,
Hmm.
and and I think there is really a kind of evolution going on in the way instruments develop, which is, well, this is quite another subject, but it comes up now. Uh, uh, you might have heard about these double top soundboards, laminated soundboards,
Hmm.
and I've been writing about that and giving. I have a very strong criticism against that. And one of the main points is that I say you can't, uh, uh, the instruments have developed over centuries
Hmm.
in, and you can't just go and change the most important properties of one of the most important parts of the instrument
Hmm.
and leave everything else the same. It's a complete, it would need a new instrument.
Hmm.
But well, let's drop this subject. We can maybe pick it up again later.
Yeah, yeah, it's very interesting, really, the way you see it. This actually make me insist to go back into the education and schooling, just to cover a small point of maybe reflection.
Okay,
Yeah,
you keep me pulling back, and I keep going.
that's interesting. Yeah, yeah, I mean, let's talk about education and schooling back then, and seeing you like a polymath, taking yourselves into all these kinds of, interests, your own reading, your own research, your own skill building. What was school back then, and what's your take on them?
Um, well, first of all, I must protest against calling me a polymath. But I hope to claim that I have a bit of common sense. That's enough.
Hmm. Hmm.
And uh, anyhow, school back then, how was it? I think it was as it was in most countries around the world.
Mm.
If you were lucky, you had a good teacher,
Mhm.
and if you were unlucky, you hadn't.
Mhm.
I was, um, I think I was also, I was lucky. I did have some really good teachers,
Mm.
but I was also lucky by being interested in many things, and which didn't make me. I didn't perceive school as a torture that I had to learn things I wasn't interested in.
Mhm.
Sometimes I was really very impatient,
Mm.
especially, for example, with physics. I was always ahead in the book and I was impatient waiting for the subject to be covered.
Mhm.
And well, in other subjects, I was very lazy and I didn't like it, of course. And
Mhm.
I wouldn't say it was anything special.
Mm.
What's special in the education when I actually was trained as an apprentice in as a guitar maker,
Mm.
that is this so-called dual system they have here in Germany,
Yeah.
which I think is really a good thing. It's called a dual because it's combines a special craft school
Mhm.
which gives you the theory and things and other also practical training.
Mhm.
And at the same time, you are working trained in a crafts business.
Mhm.
And and the idea is that if you uh, well, let's say you are trained as a guitar maker, but you might happen to make your apprenticeship in a firm which makes only banjos.
Mm.
So you will learn how to make banjos, but not to make guitars and lutes and mandolins and whatnot.
Mhm.
So to kind of balance that a bit, you
Mhm.
also go to school where you learn the other things, at least superficially.
Mhm.
In my case, though, I have to admit it was in this profession there are so few apprentices that there isn't really a school, or there are actually two schools in Germany
Mhm.
which offer block classes. So that
Mhm.
would be 6 weeks twice a year. I would have to go to school.
Mhm.
But because I had finished school with at the highest level,
Mhm.
Abitur called in German,
Mhm.
Diploma, I guess it's called in many other countries.
Yeah.
It's I was it was I was not obliged to go,
Mhm.
and then I didn't because I knew I was learning a lot faster and a lot more by not going to school.
Yeah.
and
Interesting. Mm.
and
Mm.
so I actually didn't go to school. But
Mhm.
still, the system is good. You end up
Mm.
you do an examination. You in those days it was still you actually built an instrument as a for the examination,
Mm.
and you had to make a give an example of your craftsmanship in a
Mhm.
4 hour examination. There was a theoretical test and all this,
Mhm. Mm.
and then you are a journeyman.
Mhm.
And that's the very traditional old medieval system of education in crafts.
Yeah.
And,
Mm.
and then after being a journeyman for, I think, at least 3 years or so,
Mhm.
you are allowed to apply for the Masters of Crafts title and exam.
Mm.
And that again is you go to school and there you also learn other things like bookkeeping and business law and the basic stuff at least.
Mhm.
and and such stuff and and well that I did in 96, at
Mm.
least the part for the crafts, the theoretical stuff I finished in 98.
Mhm.
And then you have the title of Masters of Crafts.
Mm.
and and
Interesting.
in those
Mm.
days it was still obligatory. If you wanted to open your own workshop, you
Mhm.
had to have this Master of Crafts title.
Mhm.
Otherwise, it could happen that somebody would sue you, and you were had to close your business or something. Now this is not the case anymore. It's an open profession. Anyone who can do it can do it,
Mhm.
and people learn from YouTube now.
Yes.
But I'm glad I learned the traditional style.
Interesting. Just hitting into what kind of training, Sebastian, have you received? If we go on the timeline, what kind of training did you receive? And if you would like to mention important chronicles.
Ooh, you mean including everything?
No, things that are important for our discussion here.
For the
Yeah,
for the instrument making. Actually, that
yeah.
was once I started with that. Uh, um, I think I was 23 years old when I started my apprenticeship. Yes,
Mm,
and uh, uh, ever since it was really I was just going straight.
mm-hmm,
It just went on. It's so I did this Master of Crafts exam, and I had opened my own shop in '96,
mm-hmm,
and and uh, and well, it just kept going. I just kept going,
mm,
and well, an important thing, of course, is that I wanted to uh, build Ouds from the very beginning,
yeah.
and uh,
Actually, that's my question. Why the interest in wood making?
yeah, that's was another accident
Mm-hmm,
that when I right after I had started my apprenticeship, I think a few months after that,
mm,
um, my boss took me to a conference about lutes.
mm-hmm,
The apprenticeship I did in Munich, and this conference was in Saarbrücken near the French border in the west. So
mm,
we traveled there and for 2 days, I believe, and it was all kinds of things concerned with lutes, European lutes, Oriental lutes, all kinds of instruments, lectures about the history, and I just happened to it took place in the castle of Saarbrücken, a very
mm,
beautiful Baroque castle,
mm-hmm,
and I happened to walk through one of these aisles, and I heard suddenly I heard some beautiful music through a door which was just a bit ajar,
mm-hmm,
and I stopped and I peeked through the gap in the door, and it was a concert going on, and on stage was Munir Bashir.
mm-hmm,
I didn't know who he was then. I had no idea. And I didn't even know what instruments he played.
mm-hmm,
But I was like struck from lightning. It was just, I, I was just standing there and listened through the gap of the door till he had finished the concert.
mm-hmm,
And I looked in the program and I read the name and Oud, and okay, so it's, I was just absolutely fascinated.
mm-hmm,
And then I tried to gather information about oud and what it is, and try to find CDs with recordings, which was not easy at that time in Germany.
mm-hmm,
And a few weeks later, again just by accident, I met a guy who he was a Persian guy from Iran.
mm-hmm,
And he played oud, and he let me play his oud to just try it,
mm-hmm,
and just holding it and feeling the vibration and hearing the sound. I decided I want to make ouds. I want to make ouds. I want to play them,
mm-hmm,
and the decision was just there. And then I kept uh, trying to find information, which was mainly through people in Munich coming, bringing ouds for repair. It didn't happen often, but a few times a year, we got
mm-hmm,
an oud for repair. And whenever it seemed to be a decent instrument, I scrutinized it and looked how it was made, and Those were mainly Turkish ouds, or once in a while a cheap Egyptian one,
Mm-hmm.
and and one day I repaired an oud which was from what's his name, Faruk Turinc from
Uh-huh.
Turkey,
Yeah.
and and that was quite good, the best I had seen until then. And I actually made precise drawings and measurements and and then started. I had no idea about the interior, but
Mm-hmm.
I knew a bit about European lute making.
Mm-hmm.
So my first draft for an oud I wanted to make was using the measurements from that Thuringe oud, combined with an insight of a European lute.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't uh, find the time to build it. But I actually already made the first parts for the pack box and things, um, which I later made a point to actually use in my very first oud,
Mm-hmm.
which I built about, I think it was 18 years later.
Wow. Now we come to
It took,
patience again. See
yeah,
the
it took
patience
a
in.
long time. And,
Yeah.
and well, uh, another story is when I actually came to finally make my first oud. That was in, I think it was in 2008 probably.
Mm-hmm.
I had moved to the area of Freiburg, and a man came to visit my workshop to try guitars, and he lived in the same village. And
Mm-hmm.
I had only one guitar to show him, a flamenco guitar I had made for myself, and he played it and he liked it very much. And then he said, I would love to buy this guitar, but I'm saving money to buy a good oud, and it's really a pity you don't make ouds.
Mm-hmm.
And then I smiled and I told him, well, this is actually what I'm planning to do for a long time now.
Mm-hmm.
And we started talking, and I ended up to offer him that, listen, you want an oud, I want to make ouds. How about you give me the order, I make it, and if you don't like it, you don't take it, and I
Mm-hmm.
give you a good price, and then if it works out, we're both happy, and if not, at least I did what I wanted to do for such a long time.
Mm-hmm.
And he happily agreed, uh, and then I got really serious again about researching about oud making, trying to gather information, trying to come up with an idea what sound I wanted to build.
Mm-hmm.
And I knew by then I had listened to quite a lot of oud music, and the only sound I liked was the sound I heard in the old recordings
Mm-hmm.
from the 60s or even older.
Mm-hmm.
And I hadn't seen uh, any oud which I really liked.
Mm-hmm.
And and even though I greatly admire Munir Bashir, of course, I
Mm-hmm.
never liked the sound of the ouds he played.
Mm-hmm.
And so I knew it wasn't that. I was more looking for something else. But I really, I didn't know what. I was a bit at a loss.
Mm-hmm.
And so in the end, I, I was, I ended up with going by pictures. That sounds very strange, maybe.
Mm-hmm.
But I always found that if I see an instrument, I have an idea about its sound.
Mm-hmm.
And
Wow.
and there were, but it's also I have. I had given a lot of thought about uh, the relationship, for example, of the circumference of the soundboard
Mhm.
to the sound it makes, because it is very influential, of course. The tighter a bend is of the edge, the
Mhm.
stiffer the edge will be. And the stiffness of the edge is one of the most important factors in how the instrument will sound and will react.
Mhm.
So I would say I had a very clear idea about what shape I wanted. And
Mhm.
this shape I had in mind, I found in some old Egyptian and some old Syrian ouds.
Mhm.
And so I just printed out pictures I had found in the internet of these old instruments and thought, okay, this is something to go by as
Mhm.
far as the shape is concerned.
Mhm.
And and then I heard about that Richard Hankey, he's an oud maker in the US. He had actually restored such an old Nahad oud
Uh-huh.
with a very similar shape. And I wrote an email to him asking for if he could give me information about the inside of the bracing and things. And then he wrote back, "It's all in my book."
Mhm.
And so I didn't know about this book, but then I said, "Oh, great!" Then I immediately ordered his book, and and but when I received the book, I didn't find it helpful, and I was a bit uh, disappointed about its um, the value I found in it.
Mhm.
And but then something strange happened, because then I was disappointed not to find what I was looking for in the book. But the same night, I had a dream, and in this dream, I was walking along a beach, and on this beach there was a little house. It was like just a white with white walls, little square house. And I went inside, and inside it was like a museum with exhibits, and and there was one wall with a hole in it. And I looked through this hole, and behind that wall, looking through the hole, I saw the soundboard of an old Nahad oud. I just knew that it was this. And I was in the dream, I was getting very excited that this is unbelievable. I'm in this dream and I'm seeing what I've been so desperately looking for.
Mm.
And so I told myself, okay, look really close and remember. And I tried to guess the measurements.
Mm.
And so I woke up in the morning and quickly made a sketch. And you won't believe it. It was when I uh, um, um, years later, when I worked with Albert Mansour in Beirut.
Mhm.
He had an old Nahat oud in his workshop, in his possession.
Mhm.
And and um, uh, uh, and he had given it a new soundboard,
Mhm.
which probably was an improvement, to be honest.
Mhm.
But when I saw it, got very excited, and I said, "Do you still have the original soundboard?" And he said, "Yeah, of course, it's somewhere there in that cupboard." And
Mhm.
I looked for it and found it, and it really looked exactly as the one I had seen in my dream.
Mhm.
Well, truth be told, there isn't that much difference really in ouds from that period. They are pretty much made the same way, but the differences are in the details, of course, and it's all about details in instruments making. It's
Mhm.
small things can have a big influence, of course. And
Interesting.
yeah, that was quite fascinating.
Mhm. Yeah,
Well,
maybe.
I managed to
Mm.
go somewhere else again.
Hmm. Which was?
Well, to coming to working with Albert Mansour and making, I mean, starting from the subject of education.
Yeah, 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 exactly. I mean, we will stop by the encounter of Albert Mansour. But let's have a break now and listen to some of your odes, and then
Yeah.
come back to this fascinating storytelling, really, and the experience we are sharing here.
Okay.
What would you choose for us to listen?
Um, um, well, actually, I would like to start with the recording Mustafa Said has given me from where he plays the oud I made for him on his balcony in Cairo,
Hmm.
and that oud I made was it yeah last year in spring, but then it took some time that we could meet and I could give it to him,
Hmm.
and it's an oud I made with a bowl from Padouk, a wood from Africa, which he likes a lot and which is certainly very suitable also to make oud bowls from,
Hmm.
and spruce soundboard. And yeah.
Yeah, let's listen then to it. Sebastian, I would like to pause and discuss the resources. And
Yeah.
I mean, sometimes you wouldn't find a resource and you would go and dream,
Huh?
as we have seen.
Yeah.
I mean, you wouldn't stop and wait for whatever existing out there.
Well,
And
right, but that is
yeah,
not the default way of gathering information.
exactly. You know, I'm sure you had a lot of things that you have approached or maybe tried for the concept of the sound, the way you
Yeah,
perceive it in your mind. Talking about plucked instruments or bowed instruments, you are a master of making the guitars, and you have seen maybe a lot of information about lute.
yeah,
There are some principles, foundations, and for sure there is a perspective of a comparison between these. I mean, what resources are you, accessing, and what sort of knowledge or skill set you are bringing up from them?
yeah. Okay, good. Your question about resources,
Mm,
um, I'll take it refers to resources of knowledge,
mhm.
because we could also talk about resources of material, of course,
Sure, sure.
and or tools for that matter.
Mhm,
But regarding resources of knowledge, um, I've I've always tried to find whatever I could get,
mhm,
and, and but sometimes not too extensively, which I say because sometimes I found things where I thought, okay, oh, if I had looked more thoroughly, I could have found this years ago.
mhm,
But well, better late than never.
mhm,
But in very important for me was to learn a bit of acoustics.
mm,
And I also, for some years, I have been teaching at the university a course for musicians to learn about acoustics and instruments.
mhm,
And I think that is something which should happen a lot more, that the musicians also learn about this aspect of their job, of their instruments.
mhm,
I haven't found a single one who has not profited from it.
mhm,
They usually always say that they really perceive their instrument better, and they also have new tools to actually achieve a greater musical expression.
mhm,
And well, and anyhow, so um, so teaching it also kind of brought me to really clarify my own ideas and my own thinking, and also brought me to trying to um, find ways to explain things which are very complex in a simple way. Or I wanted, my aim was always to make the students understand how, in most cases it was guitars, how a guitar functions,
mhm,
and how, and to understand the interrelation of different sound parameters,
mhm,
like damping and sustain and such things,
mhm,
like masses and stiffness,
mhm,
and how they relate to each other, and or to understand how you actually produce sound with your finger on the string, and how you can gain better control by understanding what you are doing there.
mhm,
And um, well, all this work in that field brought me in contact with um, I think one of the most important acousticians in the field of plucked instruments, Bernard Richardson from the University of Cardiff in Wales, in the UK.
mhm,
He is now retired, I believe, but he has, with his research group, he has done fantastic work about plucked instruments, and and um, and well, I profited a lot from that, and reading his papers, and actually also talking to him,
Mm-hmm.
and that is something I would recommend to all my colleagues to follow up on. I
Mm-hmm.
can give you a link which you might put in at the end or so to one of his most important papers,
Yeah,
and then people can go from there if
it
they're
would be interesting, really.
interested.
Mm.
And there are, for example, one thing I had always kind of felt intuitively from the very beginning of my instrument making was that I was always in favor of smaller soundboards.
Mm.
And there are lots of historic examples, of course, but there was a tendency, especially in the 80s, 90s, to make larger instruments, and I always felt that was wrong, but I couldn't have explained why until I read the papers from Bernard Richardson,
Mm-hmm.
and so that kind of really helped me to really understand what's going on and what I'm doing, and even argue for that if I wanted to.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And, and that also was an important influence on the ouds I make,
Mm.
which have a shape which allows to make a smaller soundboard.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, hopefully we see some of these Ouds shortly. But what about the other resources you mentioned? So these are like knowledge and concept resources versus natural resources.
Yeah, well, natural resources, there are two parts. There is
Mm.
the wood, of course,
Mm-hmm.
and that really is I would have probably stories for many hours
Yeah,
about wood.
yeah.
Sometimes it's just a small special piece of wood you find,
Mm.
which is just inspiring you, and you want to make something from it, or for example, there is, well, I can just
Mm-hmm.
show show you.
Mm-hmm.
uh, well, this is
Mm-hmm.
an oud I made from the bowl is made from a piece of cherry,
Mm-hmm.
and I found it, the wood, with my neighbor, a furniture restorator,
Mm-hmm.
and and he it's a piece that was enough for to make two oud bowls from, and I saw it, and I've never seen a piece of cherry like this. Cherry is not an especially good wood for making instruments from, in my opinion.
Mm-hmm.
In some combinations it works fine, but it has to be good. But it's not one of my favorites for sure. But this one was absolutely exceptional,
Mm-hmm.
and 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 so when I asked him to sell it to me, he gave it to me as a gift, and I made a beautiful instrument from it.
Mm-hmm.
And this is, I like such stories. I think most people do. Or I have some soundboards, for example, from cedar soundboards from Canada, which come from a tree which burned in a fire in the 1930s, and then just stood dead in the forest until it was cut down in 10 years ago or so. And the wood was in perfect condition.
Mm-hmm.
And that is just fascinating. And it is a very fascinating wood.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, this story from this tree inspired uh, rather famous American poet to write a poem about it.
Hmm.
And so that's such are nice stories.
Yeah.
Or I have in 4 years ago, I went to cut down a huge spruce tree in the Alps,
Hmm.
which I hope is the last tree I really cut myself, because it is just a ridiculous amount of work. It would be much cheaper to go to the wood merchant and just buy the best soundboards I can get.
Yeah.
But it's an experience I wouldn't like to miss.
Hmm.
And the sound of these soundboards I get from this tree, I started to work with it now.
Hmm.
It's is extraordinary. It's just such quality. And sometimes I wonder if it's really the wood itself, the tree, which is so good, or if it's my relationship to it, which is also influencing the sound I get from it.
Yeah.
And
Interesting.
yeah, that is. I mean, this is also to mention this at this point. People often ask if how is it? Is there any personal influence in the instrument, or what is the difference between an instrument I make or one of my colleagues makes and a factory instrument?
Hmm.
And I think there's a huge difference, because in when I make an instrument, it's, you could say it's the sum of thousands of subjective decisions I make.
Hmm.
You know, every single step of the work, every little chip of wood I decide to take off or to leave, it is a subjective personal decision I make. So in the end, the instrument is a sum of all this subjectivity, as it were. That does not mean, unfortunately, that it's the result is necessarily good, because that depends on other things. Most of all, if the instrument is, if you have a clear concept of what you want to do. If you don't have a clear understanding and a clear concept of what you are making, then the result can be very arbitrary, can go one way or the other, whatever aspect of uh, your work is getting the upper hand, as it were. It's But if you have a clear concept where everything you do goes in the same direction, then you will achieve a very good consistency. That's, in my opinion, the most important thing about consistency. There is, I hear colleagues of mine talking about, okay, you have to be very precise in your measurements and blah, blah. And, but this is, in my opinion, completely wrong, because the actual measurements can vary greatly, because the wood itself is such an inconsistent material. You,
Yeah.
you even when I cut soundboards from the very same tree, there's not one which is the same. And in the end, it's my idea of what the soundboard should do, and to have the sensitivity when I work it, to feel if it has reached the right degree of pliability, and but still enough strength, and in relation to my concept of how it should work, that defines the result in the end.
Wow. This is
And
very complicated, really, the way it is, because the question comes to how can this such knowledge be written down or maybe recorded? It's a very personal thing, right?
yeah, it is, but I think it's really not that difficult. I could just
Mm,
uh, uh, come from the other end. I would say the
mm,
least important is
mm,
actually the material.
mm,
Is I would say you can build a good instrument from even very poor material.
mm,
There are plenty examples of that, and and uh, with guitars as well as ouds, there are many. One of the very most famous guitar makers of all times was Hermann Hauser from Germany,
mhm,
and he used many soundboards which most of my colleagues, including myself, would probably use as firewood, but he made fantastic guitars with it.
mhm,
And you find plenty of ouds with soundboards which appear to be made really from scrap wood or really very poor quality wood.
mhm,
And still they work fantastic and sound well. So but I would say good material certainly helps.
mhm.
And
Yeah.
then, of course, it's not only about sound; it's also about durability and
Mhm.
uh, the it shouldn't crack and all this.
Yeah.
And but this is the material is the least important, in my opinion.
Mhm,
Then the second important aspect is precision.
mhm,
Obviously, there should be some degree of precision in what you are doing.
mhm,
But there, I would say I'm not a stickler for precision. I've seen absolute masterpieces of instrument making, which appear to be made rather unprecise.
mhm,
When you look inside, they might look a bit crude or anything, but for somebody who understands, you can see whoever made this, he knew what he was doing, even though the cuts are crude and rough.
mhm,
But still, of course, precision is an aspect.
mhm,
There's no doubt. But it's not the. I might have a soundboard which is 2/10 of a millimeter thinner than another one, even though I want to achieve the same sound.
mhm,
But this specific soundboard requires to be 2/10 of a millimeter thinner, and that's in soundboard thicknessing. That's a lot.
mhm,
It's a well, anyhow, and then now the third and most important aspect of for consistency is what I mentioned before,
mhm,
that you have a clear concept and an understanding of how the whole thing is working.
mhm,
And then you can achieve very consistent results even without using the same material or using very different materials or whatever.
mhm. So the how is the most important then. How to reach that certain goal in mind, which is born from the vast experience of seeing instruments. I would say old books, manuscripts, uh, nature, maybe the sound
Yeah,
of nature.
yeah. Well, the most important, I would say, is to understand basic acoustics,
Hmm.
and from that you can really gather a lot.
Hmm.
And then again, the common sense.
Hmm.
There's um, well, I'm doing some things in the way I make my soundboards, for example,
Hmm.
which, as far as I know, nobody else has ever done that way.
Hmm.
Which uh, um, these are ideas I came up with, knowing about acoustics and knowing about wood and mechanics, and trying to solve problems.
Mm-hmm.
And and so I think you always have to come from different angles
Mm.
to find new ways.
Mm-hmm.
And um, a lot
Actually, we discussed the three levels of
yes,
importance,
yeah,
and we said the how seems to
ah,
be the most important based on the
yeah,
concepts. And I have understood really from what you have said that you see every possible resource where you use your common sense and experience to get value of, including old books, manuscripts, other instruments, the sound, the recordings, or maybe the sound of the nature, right?
yeah, right,
Mm. Yeah, interesting.
yeah.
Mm.
As to nature, I think I told you earlier that
Mm.
the first sound or musical sound I consciously perceived
Mhm.
was the sound of a blackbird singing.
Mm.
When I was a child, I often was lying awake in bed waiting to fall asleep with the window open.
Mm.
And on the neighbor's house, there was a blackbird singing, and I greatly enjoyed that.
Mhm.
And that kind of became the very core
Mm.
of my sound ideal for all instruments I make. There is something in the sound of the blackbird, in the voice of the blackbird. There is a depth in in the trebles.
Mhm.
There is a darkness in the trebles, you could say,
Mhm.
and a lightness in the basses, if you
Mhm.
can talk about a bass sound in a blackbird's voice. But for me, there is one.
Mhm.
But actually, saying this reminds me of this Chinese concept of yin and yang,
Mhm.
that the dark contains the light and the light contains the dark.
Yeah.
And that is, I hear in that sound of the voice of the blackbird, and that is also what I want to have in my instruments. I
Mhm.
want to have the trebles to be, I sometimes say, to have a belly, to have a really a fat, substantial core,
Mhm.
not to be thin and piercing.
Mm.
And and I want my basses to have an airy quality, have a lots of overtones which make them alive and interesting.
Mhm. Interesting. By the way, the blackbird is maybe the name Zuriab.
Yes,
They
yeah,
say that Zuriab is the common blackbird. So
yeah,
see how things are all connected, and that's Zuriab is a master of oud, right?
yes. Well, one of the earliest ones.
Interesting. Sebastian, would you like to have a little bit of demonstration of what you have in the workshop, what you are working on? Let's just get a feel of what you are describing, really. So
Yes,
exciting.
yes. Why not? Well, let's start. I have to somehow hold this here.
Hmm.
The mess of my workbench, and I'm currently I'm currently making four instruments, two ouds and
Hmm.
two guitars.
Hmm.
And this is what I call my new oud, or my new shape,
Hmm.
which is very well. You can see it probably better from
It's so unique, really, the way it looks.
behind. Um, that it's um, a lot flatter than half the diameter of the soundboard, which allows me to make a smaller soundboard,
Hmm.
and at the same time have enough volume in the body to get a good get a good bass.
Hmm.
And also it makes the the oud very comfortable to hold, at least
Hmm.
in most players' opinion. It's you can have your arm rests very comfortable on the bowl rather than on the edge of the bowl,
Hmm.
and and I find that very comfortable. anyhow, this shape is really quite radical, and I made just recently a new one which follows the same concept,
Mm-hmm.
but is a bit less radical. It's the light. I try to come from this side, and
Yeah, it's very clear.
yeah,
Mm-hmm.
it's yeah. I think this way you can see it well.
Mm-hmm.
It's also still a relatively small soundboard. The soundboard width in this one is 34 centimeter.
Mm-hmm.
The other one is only 32, and and but the volume is actually quite large with this one,
Mm-hmm.
and so it has gets a very good bass. It's very difficult to build
Mm-hmm.
because unlike most ouds have a more or less spherical shape,
Mm-hmm.
like the cross section is a half circle, and that means that all the joints of the ribs
Mm-hmm.
are completely straight. You can just pull the rib over a plane and make it straight, and then it should fit.
Mm-hmm.
With this shape, it's every joint is convex or concave, and I have to it takes quite some time to make it and fit it.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm I'm getting faster and faster,
Mm-hmm.
and I'm at the same time I'm finishing two guitars.
Mm-hmm.
This is these two here. They are the varnish is almost finished,
Mm-hmm.
and so I'll try to work in a rhythm of having two guitars or two instruments being varnished.
Mm-hmm.
I only make French polish with shellac,
Uh-huh.
and while this is happening, which needs a lot of drying time in between, I start making two other instruments. And when those are being varnished, I start with the next round, preparing for the next four. But then actually, I start to assemble two and try to get into such kind of rotation,
Mm-hmm.
which in most cases never works out. So, well, you can see everywhere there is wood in
Yes.
the workshop, and this is only a small part. I have a woodshed outside
Mm-hmm.
where I have larger pieces, and then I have it's still almost 4 cubic meters of this spruce
Mm-hmm.
I cut 4 years ago. So there's a lot, and this is this bandsaw here
Mm-hmm.
is one of my most favorite machines. It's a very good saw,
Mm-hmm.
and it's was made the same year I was made in 1966, and and they don't make such quality nowadays anymore.
Mm-hmm.
And and it the table can be tilted quickly,
Mm-hmm.
and that is helps a lot with resawing soundboards or all kinds of things, which makes it the perfect saw for instrument makers.
Mm-hmm.
Behind that, I have a smaller bandsaw too. I use for smaller things and curves.
Mm-hmm.
And there is a well here I have an array of smaller machines. Um, well, that reminds me again of resources.
Mm-hmm.
One of important resource, of course, is tools and machines.
Yeah.
And actually, most instrument makers make a lot of tools for themselves. For example, this buffing machine here
Mm-hmm.
is I built myself because to buy one which fulfill the needs I have, is very very difficult
Hmm.
and or very costly. I think to buy one which would be the right thing for me would have cost me like 7,000 euros minimum or so.
Oh. Hmm.
And so the parts for this machine maybe were 100 euros, not more.
Hmm.
And and uh, and even in such things, knowing about acoustics helps a lot.
Yeah.
For example, the spacing here of the buffing wheels and the bearing,
Hmm.
they are spaced 11 to 7 to 13,
Hmm.
which are prime numbers,
Mm.
which means the first resonance frequency where this thing would start vibrating is extremely high
Hmm.
because it would be the first common denominator of
Wow.
11 13. and and that is such a high frequency that it's irrelevant.
Hmm.
So this machine runs very smooth and perfectly, but I actually use it a little, very little.
Interesting.
And
Mm.
well, here I have some yeah, special machines, all kinds of things. Very old drill machine,
Hmm.
and lots of well,
Hmm.
wood, all kinds of gadgets and parts of projects lying around.
Hmm.
Uh, Here is well, parts and for oud and guitars, different parts which are in different stages of the work prepared.
Hmm.
When I make raw pieces, for example, these are all for guitar necks. So I prepare like 20, 30 necks raw to have them ready to use when I actually get into the building.
Hmm.
These here, this is all to turn packs from oud packs.
Hmm.
And well, I have this is a very small circular saw and table router. And this is another self-made machine, a drum sander, which I use to thickness the ribs for ouds and stuff.
Hmm.
And well, that's about it. Huh? Yeah. Uh, Planer, and yeah, that's about it.
Is it? This is heaven. I mean, Sebastian, you are living in heaven.
Yeah, sometimes I think so, not always. But well, what's really interesting is you can't really see it in here.
Hmm.
This is a very important thing, this shelf,
Hmm.
because I use it for in assembly to glue. I have wooden sticks which I can prop in here,
Hmm.
and instead of using clamps, and I use it to glue the bars on the soundboard, for example.
Hmm.
And here are different, mostly guitar. I think it's no one wood soundboard, but mostly guitar backs and soundboards.
Hmm.
And
Beautiful.
I have this little cabinet here. It used to be a small office, but I keep it as a gluing room because I need to dehumidify it,
Hmm.
the air when I assemble the instruments. In Germany, the climate is very humid,
Hmm.
and so most of the times I have to run the dehumidifier to get the air humidity low enough to assemble the instruments. Otherwise, they would uh, tend to crack, and when they come in a dry climate, and
Hmm.
that's not wanted, of course.
Thank you very much for this great quick tour of the
Yeah,
place. So great, really. It's a heaven. So beautiful. And here we have a lot of things happening like every day. I don't know for how many hours.
yeah,
Yeah, Sebastian, would you like to have another piece of music played on one of your roads?
Yes, of course, always.
Yeah.
Um, well, you can choose a piece from Megabuban
Hmm.
and whatever you like.
Sure. So anyone of Nagar's playing on your roads.
Yeah, please.
Okay. So we will enjoy one then.
Okay.
Sebastian, would you like to touch again into the concept of copying versus problem solving? I see even that you are creating your own machines and your own equipments, and I'm sure there are a lot of things that you came up with as a solution for approaching for example a gluing issue, or maybe a sound, or maybe bringing up this kind of complex oud. The way I see it is so complex, maybe so simple, to just to produce an imagined sound, right?
Yeah. Um, well, I would say there is nothing wrong in copying if that's what you want to do,
Mm-hmm.
but I just find it rather boring.
Mm-hmm.
So um, to me, it simply never appealed.
Mm-hmm.
I don't know. I don't want to judge it, but yeah, I think if you have the choice, and and how can you prefer to copy something when you can do your own stuff?
Mm-hmm.
It's as I said in the beginning about creativity. I think it's so much more fulfilling to be really creative.
Mm-hmm.
And but let me point out that I don't think this kind of creativity I'm talking about is nothing egoistic.
Mm-hmm.
It's not a I don't feel, oh, I'm so proud that I did this.
Mm-hmm.
I I, I rather feel like, oh, I'm blessed that this is happening through me. It's not that I feel, oh, I'm such a great guy. I'm doing this,
Mm-hmm.
and and if that would be the case, something else is going on, in my opinion. But true creativity is really more like being open for something to happen,
Mm-hmm.
and copying is really boring in comparison, isn't it?
Mm-hmm.
It's it's it simply was never an objective for me
Mm-hmm.
to go and copy. I can't really say why, but it never appealed to me.
Wouldn't it be the maybe first stage of learning anything?
Um, I guess so, and of course I did a lot of copying, and also I want to make clear that we're all not alone. We're not. I'm not uh, inventing anything alone, but I'm just a tiny link in a vast chain of people who have
Mm-hmm.
done things, developed things, and 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 I'm certainly not the end of that chain.
Mm-hmm.
But if if I can have the feeling, okay, I have contributed something valuable, that's wonderful.
Mm-hmm.
And if people later find, okay, this was bullshit, that's fine with me too. But to have the feeling I did my own thing and I did my best, the best I could,
Mm-hmm.
what more can you have?
Yeah. And how would you know that you have known the thing to the heart of it? If you
I
go
can't.
deep into research and maybe problem solve things and so on, would it be reachable?
Uh, I don't know. I don't know. I can't know. How could I? It's uh, maybe it's endless, but maybe there is also a point where it's um, where you say it's good enough.
Mm-hmm.
It actually reminds me of uh, uh, Robert Lundberg. He was an U.S. American lute maker,
Mm-hmm.
and he practically single-handedly revived historic lute making.
mm,
In the middle of the 20th century, practically all knowledge about European lute making was lost.
mm,
And the lutes that were being made had not much to do with
mm,
the lutes as they were built in the 18th century still.
mhm,
And Robert Lundberg, he traveled through all the museums in Europe. I guess he has seen all the lutes which still exist, and has um, scrutinized them, taken measurement, tried to find out how they were being made, and from this research started to revive uh, uh, the lute making. And almost all lute makers which work now are his students.
mm,
So he had an enormous influence on the lute making. The reason why he comes to my mind now is, by the way, he unfortunately died very young, I think at the age of 53 or 54, some 10 years ago or so. But fortunately, he had written a book which was almost finished.
mhm,
So uh, the book is there for anyone who's interested, and I can give the details in the end if
mhm.
you like.
Yeah.
And one of the things he came up with was the concept of what he called being good enough.
Mhm,
That's what triggered the memory.
mhm,
Because he said, the from his understanding, the lute makers of the Renaissance times and later, they worked very differently from how we work today.
mhm,
I mean, today there are very few people like me and my colleagues making handmade instruments. It's actually a very uh, exclusive thing, you can say. And the instruments are very costly, and because the work is time consuming and all this.
mhm,
And then we have the industrial produced instruments, which are much cheaper, and there are lots of them.
mhm,
But in pre-industrial times, there just weren't any industrial instruments. Everything was handmade. And I think the craftsmen of those times, they uh, were incredibly good at their job. They were just probably most better than even the best ones today in the way they handled their tools and everything. And and but because they had to cater to the complete market, cheap instruments, expensive instrument, everything, and to cater to the demand which was there, which was not so much less than now. I mean, there were less people living in the world, of course, but
yeah.
there were also lots of musicians, and so they wouldn't waste energy or time. And and so Bob Lundberg came up with this concept of what he called good enough
Mm,
as a motto, as it were, for working. He
mm,
said these people, they knew exactly what they were doing, and they were avoiding anything unnecessary. They just stopped when it was good enough.
mhm,
And so good enough for him, for Bob Lundberg, was not meaning something mediocre or something, but it really means a different definition of mastery
mhm,
than we have today.
mm,
Because, and that I can very much reconfirm from my 30 years of experience of making instruments,
mhm,
one of the most difficult things is to know when to stop
mm,
and to say, okay, that's it, that's good enough.
mm,
And and that is a quality I can also see in in all instruments, I would really call a piece of masterwork, a
Hmm.
masterpiece.
Interesting. Very interesting. And let's talk about what is considered to be a contribution in the field of luthiers, Sebastian.
Um, well, actually, the really good things I don't want to talk about
Mm,
now because I'm planning to publish them in a book. Uh,
mm.
uh, I'm I'm planning to write in my retirement, which will never come. No, but seriously,
Yeah,
I'm planning to publish it, and I don't want to shoot my best bullet in advance, as it were.
yeah,
But there are some contributions for sure.
yeah. But in general, I mean about luthiers. What would
About
you say? Oh, this is a contribution. This is not.
um, yes, that's of course always my personal opinion,
Mm,
but I think there are some things which are where I say, okay, this is really a good idea. This is really makes a lot of sense.
hmm,
And there's also a lot where I would say, okay, this is just bullshit.
mm,
Or even things where I would say it's going in a wrong direction. Um, well, there's a very good example that comes to my mind, but maybe it's a bit too complex to explain it.
hmm.
And but well, I can try to sketch it very briefly.
Please.
It's it's about in the around 2000 or so, those years,
Hmm.
Christian calendar, a model of guitar became very popular, which had a raised neck. So the neck was raised above the fingerboard, and as a consequence, received an angle to for the strings to reach the bridge in the right place.
Hmm.
And there was a big hype about this model with because it had the advantage of making the higher frets on the fingerboard, the higher positions, more easily accessible,
Hmm.
which is certainly true. But I was very much against this way of building, and and I actually wrote a paper about that because I think uh, uh, um, it's again you change a very important aspect of the structure, which in this case is the neck angle. And in the history of guitar making, there is the most simple way of building is that you have a straight edge on the soundboard. The sides of the guitar are on the same height, and so the edge of the soundboard is just in one level.
Hmm.
And then you just glue the fingerboard in the same plane on top. So everything is very straight and neat and very simple.
Hmm.
And then you come up with a height of bridge, which makes sense. So everything works fine. Then in that is what is mainly called the school of Granada
Hmm.
in guitar making. And then a later development happened in the school of Madrid, which is much more sophisticated because they gave an angle to the soundboard. The
Hmm.
soundboard in the upper part is kind of bending back a little bit,
Mm.
which requires also the neck to make an angle slightly backwards, maybe only 2 degrees or 1.5 degrees backwards.
Uh-huh.
And this is making everything a lot more complicated because you have to give an angle to the fingerboard as well and to the sides. So why make this effort? There must be a reason.
Hmm.
And and I thought about it and I thought, okay, they didn't do this for nothing. It must have a reason. And in my opinion, the reason is that you change the angle the string pulls on the bridge.
Mm-hmm.
And that has to do with the basic structure of a guitar soundboard, which is slightly domed. There is tension built in. And that was one of the great breakthroughs in guitar making in the 19th century,
Mm-hmm.
because it allowed to make thinner soundboards which were still stable enough.
Mm-hmm.
And and my point now is, with this development in Madrid, giving the angle the neck a backwards angle, is introducing a force component which is actually pressing the soundboard downwards.
Mm-hmm.
And because it's domed, it increases the stability of that dome.
Mm-hmm.
You might think of it, it's a bit uh, not such a good example, but you might think of it like a stone bridge which is built without concrete, just the stones
Yeah.
built in an arch,
Yeah.
and it's stable because of the weight of the stones.
Mm.
So it's the pressure of the stones going downwards which makes the arch stable.
Yeah.
Same way, the pressure on the bridge is increasing the stability of the dome of the soundboard. It's a
Interesting.
very small effect,
Mm.
but in my opinion, this is the most important reason for making this change, which happened in the school of Madrid in guitar making.
Mm.
And and now when you have the in the case of the raised neck, the raised fingerboards, the opposite is happening.
Mm-hmm.
You have to give the neck an angle forward, and quite dramatically so,
Mm.
and that is uh, creating a force component pulling the bridge upwards.
Mm-hmm.
And that, from my theory, is going against all the previous development.
Mm.
So all previous development went into the direction of allowing to make the dome stable, to allow a thinner soundboard which can vibrate better.
Mm.
And now you do the opposite, and create a soundboard which you actually have to make thicker.
Mm.
And I could show that he actually used quite thick soundboards
Mm-hmm.
because you have to counteract that weakening of the structure.
Interesting.
And that is, for example, just a bit long story for an example
Mm.
where I say, okay, this is not a good idea,
Mm.
and it I'm quite sure such a good idea will be selected out by the evolution of
Mm.
the instrument.
Interesting. Let me just be so close to another question, really. I would like to ask you, what problem are you solving for the oud? You have seen a lot of ouds by now, and you have been thinking about this for many years. You have listened to many sounds of ouds, and you know what sound you are looking into. What are you trying to solve for oud? What are you trying to do in the chain of all this history of oud making?
Um, well, first of all, let me say that uh, um, uh, whenever we talk about problem solving there,
Mm,
it implies that there is a solution to the problem, which replies there is something right and something wrong. I
exactly.
don't see it that way.
Hmm.
It's it's when we make judgments about, well, actually just about anything,
Hmm.
we make judgments about function.
Hmm.
So when we say, is this a good oud? Then it's really the question, okay, it might be good for the purpose I have in mind for it, but
Mm,
somebody else might have another purpose in mind for it.
hmm.
And and you get my point, or my father, who has written a lot about evaluation in literature,
Mm-hmm.
he gave a very nice example. He's a simple example with a tree.
Mm.
When you say this is a good tree, uh, you might refer to this a tree being very straight because you want to make the mast of a ship from it.
Mm-hmm.
But if it might be a curved tree, and then you say, oh, this is a perfect tree because you
Mm.
want to make the hull of the ship from it and you're
Mm-hmm.
looking for curved trees. So to illustrate the point, when we make a judgment, it's always a judgment about a function.
Mm.
So the question really is, what is the function? What is the aim? What do you want to achieve?
Mm.
And and for me, in reality, of course, that is highly subjective. I have this sound in my head which I want to achieve because it makes me happy.
Mm-hmm.
Funnily, I found that it seems many people are looking for the same sound.
Mm-hmm.
And that I find really fascinating because in reality, we all have no idea what the other person is perceiving, do we? It's in philosophy they call it qualia,
Mm-hmm.
the perception content
Mm-hmm.
of the perception.
Mm-hmm.
So if if you see a red flower
Mm-hmm.
and you say this flower is red, and I say yes, right, it's red,
Mm-hmm.
but in reality we don't know what you are really seeing, what you are perceiving.
Yeah,
Just we at some point we agreed to call this perception red.
exactly.
The same, of course, is happening about sound. And but uh, when I was teaching the students at the university, the first thing I always did was trying to develop a terminology about sound.
Mm-hmm.
And that was always very interesting because when in the beginning, they usually had great difficulties to describe uh, their sound perception.
Mm-hmm.
Sorry. And,
Mm-hmm.
and then by developing terminology, finding words how to describe certain aspects of the sound, they suddenly, the usually comment was, oh, suddenly I hear a lot more,
Mm-hmm.
which of course isn't true, but they by having names for their perceptions, it reached their consciousness or another level of consciousness, to be more precise.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, your contribution and the purpose in mind, and what you have done so far in Dawood, and what you are still working on, all of these things are connected, you know.
Yes, it's all
And
connected.
yeah,
And
yeah.
what I what uh, what I want to there are several aspects.
Mm-hmm.
It's um, on one side you could say when all instruments I make,
Mm-hmm.
and I made more than 250 so far.
Mm-hmm.
It's all of them are you could say I make for myself
Mm-hmm.
in some way.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, when I build on order for a customer, that is a beautiful addition to the process. It
Mm-hmm.
brings something else into it,
Mm-hmm.
and and but so it's really you could almost say, well, I'm just having fun to try to make the sound I want to have, and
Mm-hmm.
if I succeed, I'm happy.
Mm-hmm.
But fortunately, it seems like there are other people who like it too. And and as I said, or as I wanted to say, when I talking about sound perception and terminology with the students, I had the impression that most people look for the same sound. our sound ideas are not that different really,
Mm-hmm.
and and there seem to be a core sound, of course.
Mm.
We have we all have some idea of what an oud sounds like or what a guitar sounds like,
Yeah.
and we might have different preferences and evaluate one sound aspect higher than another. So
Mm-hmm.
I would say our list of priorities might differ a bit,
Mm-hmm.
but basically we are looking for the same sound.
Mm.
And and what I found is um, most interesting to improve in oud sounds. The most ouds I know, if they are good, they have. I could make two categories
Mm.
of what I find are good ouds.
Mm.
One category is they have a nice timbre, a nice voice. They just have a nice overall sound,
Mm-hmm.
and but it's difficult to form the sound, to work with it, to express yourself through the instrument.
Mm-hmm.
And the other category is instruments who can do that. They allow you to express it, but they lack something in their timbre. They are maybe not loud enough to really express yourself in the way that they lack dynamic range of dynamic. When you play, you feel like there comes a point, okay, here, that's it. I can force a sound, but then it just sounds forced. It's not getting any louder or any more expressive, or it's there are limits to the way you can shape the sound, or there are
Mm-hmm.
problems with the balance that one some range of some part of the tonal range is very nice or have certain qualities. Another
Mm-hmm.
tonal range is very different or is not as nice, and things
Mm-hmm.
like that.
Mm-hmm.
And when I started to learn about oud making, I was very surprised actually that ouds were built very much the same way European Renaissance lutes were made.
Mm-hmm.
There isn't much difference really, especially in the bowl and the soundboard. And and then it seemed like the lute developed greatly in Europe,
Mm-hmm.
while the oud stayed very much the same through many centuries.
Uh-huh.
And this is not saying that the oud was falling asleep or kind of not developing. I think the reason for that is the development in music mainly.
Mm-hmm.
That in Europe, the music developed into the direction of harmony
Mm-hmm.
and and chords, and the Oriental music kept on developing in the direction of melody,
Yeah.
and that simply in these changes in the music in Europe required different instruments, and so a big development happened there.
Mm-hmm.
But if if you say what I would be like to remembered as
Mm-hmm.
an luthier by future generations,
Mm-hmm.
I might say I would like to be remembered as the guy who reintroduced some aspect or some knowledge of the European lute makers into oud making.
Mm-hmm.
And that to me feels like a closing of a circle because, as we all know,
Mm-hmm.
it was the Arabs who brought the oud to Spain, and then it was played all over the place, and at some point uh, the lute appeared. It's actually I tried to find out about this period of the 14th and 15th century,
Mm-hmm.
and we really have very little knowledge about that time. Suddenly, the European lute was there,
Mm-hmm.
and we have these famous pictures from old scriptures from the I believe it's the 13th century or 14th, the Cantigas de la Santa Maria from Spain, where you can see Christian monks
Mm-hmm.
playing the oud alongside with Arabs or even African people,
Mm-hmm.
and and these pictures are giving proof of how liberal things were in those time in Spain. It must have been very culturally fantastic time.
Mm.
Actually, a bit later than Zuriab,
Yeah,
but
interesting.
he was at the beginning of that period, of course. And by the way, since you mentioned once the credibility of or the content of old scriptures,
Mm-hmm.
uh, uh, it there is the very first document we have about European lute making. It's very famous. It's from around 1450 Christian calendar,
Yeah.
so 15th century, by Arnaud de Zwolle from the Netherlands. It's quite ubiquitous all over this drawing from his paper, and this was always taken as a proof. Okay, this is how they built the very pre-Renaissance, late medieval
Mm-hmm.
lutes. And there is a very interesting article written by a great lute maker from England. David Van Edwards is his name, if I remember correctly. I can give a link to that article
Yeah.
later. Uh, he actually made a brilliant analysis of this drawing, and he came up with a very conclusive explanation, in my opinion, uh, uh, showing that probably Arnaud de Zwolle got it wrong and probably mistook an information he had gotten,
Mm-hmm.
which resulted in his drawing to be faulty
Mm-hmm.
because it doesn't fit with all any other paintings or pictures of lutes from that time. And that is an excellent example where uh, uh, I think it's very important to study all the old scriptures and anything we can find,
Mm-hmm.
but always use common sense.
Yeah.
And and this is another example. This brilliant work from David Van Edwards
Mm-hmm.
is was possible because he also had knowledge from different sides. He worked as a historian, but he also had the knowledge of an instrument maker,
Mm-hmm.
and 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 that allowed him to pause and say, okay, there's something wrong here,
Mm-hmm.
which the historian would have never realized. But because he was both, he could see it.
That's why we want more of the polymaths.
Yes, I think that's uh, actually, as far as I know, it has been reintroduced in European university that it's
Mm.
possible to study universal science. I don't know exactly how they call it, but
Mm-hmm.
it's basically this idea.
Mm,
and I think it's a beautiful idea.
mm. Interesting. I'm really enjoying our discussion, really, Sebastian.
I'm happy. Me too.
And I would be greedy to go back to a point you mentioned just a little back when you mentioned about the perfect or the good instrument and you gave the two factors of lute.
Yeah.
Can we discuss the same thing about the violin, the guitar, the viola?
Well, yes, of course. I'm not very knowledgeable about both instruments, but a point which always strikes me is um, the these instruments, the bow instruments of the violin family,
Mm,
they have, in my opinion, reached a degree of perfection which I think cannot be um, improved upon really.
mhm,
And this perfection for me is defined by a perfect harmony of the concept of form follows function.
mhm,
And and there is a, everything in that concept makes sense.
mhm,
And I can see a similar perfection in the lute family, in
mm,
the oud, in the European lutes.
mhm,
I can see that perfection, for example, in the guitar.
mm,
And the guitar for me is I sometimes call it the the instrument of contradiction.
mhm,
And the reason for that is that mainly the classical guitar, but also the steel string guitar,
mm,
it 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 aims for a sound which is not in its nature. It aims for a lasting sound, a sustained sound.
mm,
But the sound of any plucked instrument is limited, very limited in time by
mhm.
by its nature, by
By
definition.
design. Mm,
Yeah, you pluck, and that's all the energy you have. With a
mm.
bowed instrument, you can eternally introduce more energy into the system by using the bow
Yeah.
and create an endless sound.
Mhm,
And with the flute, it's similar.
mhm,
And but with the guitar, it's uh, sustain is an aspect very demanded by the guitarists
mm,
by uh, and but it's against its nature and you could say a lot of everything in guitar making is pivots around trying to solve the contradiction of building an instrument which is both stable enough
mhm,
to hold the strings but uh, movable, flexible enough to allow a sound which is more flute-like and sustained.
mm,
And with other plucked instruments, this is not the case. With uh, um, ouds, with lutes, an extreme example would be the banjo. The percussive element is very pronounced,
mhm,
and it's not trying to hide it. It's just the sound it has. So in all plucked instruments, the percussive aspect of sound is there and is characteristic for its sound.
mhm,
But you could say the classical guitar is trying to hide it the most, and the others don't. But I'm going astray again. It's it's the what I think it's with ouds. It is very attractive to have the possibility of more sustain.
mhm,
So I'm building ouds which do have a lot of sustain,
mhm,
but I don't want to hide the percussiveness. I want to that the player is capable of kind of controlling the sustain if doesn't get too long, because if it is, you get all other problems of too many notes seeping into each other, masking each other,
Mhm.
and then you get intonation problems and whatnot.
Yeah, especially for the melodic nature
Yeah,
for
right.
the ouds. Yeah, what about the viola, Sebastian?
Uh, the viola is, I always say that if I would make any bowed instruments, it would be the viola, because it's the least perfect of the violin
Mm,
family, in my opinion. The reason being that it's actually a little bit too small for its tonal range.
mm,
So the body it has, which is kind of can't be made much smaller to play it in this position.
mhm.
If it's too big, it becomes impossible. And then, uh, well, we all know the cello is not played in such a position anymore.
Yeah.
So, um, but for its tonal range, it's a bit too small, you could say, to put it simply.
Mhm,
And that makes it difficult to make a viola which really sounds good. They tend to sound all a bit nasal, and
mhm.
it's a yeah, and that for me would be a challenge, and I like challenges.
Mhm.
So so if I would build any instrument of that family, I would choose the viola.
So that's the next problem, maybe.
Ah, I don't know.
Interesting. Sebastian, if you classify the ouds you have seen, including your own made ouds, would you classify the ones that really fall under what is accepted as a oud sound versus others? Because I see there is a lot of chaos in there, where people introduce maybe more strings or maybe go below range, above range. Sometimes for a personal preference, say, let's have this kind of wood or this kind of material be there. I'd like to just hear your opinion about all these things.
Well, my opinion is that there is uh, some things, same as for the ideas in instrument making, some things make a lot of sense, others don't.
Hmm.
Personally, for example, I don't like the Iraqi style oud with a floating bridge and a high F string.
Hmm.
That's just my personal opinion, of course. And but the reason is for me this F string is just a bit too thin, too piercing in sound. I don't like the sound, and it's I think it would require a smaller body.
Mm,
It's like same with the violin and the viola. It has to be in proportion for
mhm.
the tonal range.
Yeah.
And so for me, the high F is a bit too high, and I don't like that very much.
Mhm,
But I perfectly understand that many musicians like to play it because in many cases it makes a lot of sense musically,
mm,
and many things are easier to play if you have that high F string there.
mhm,
So I absolutely understand if people play it.
mm,
And uh, about the tonal range, it's I'm very much in favor of rather going lower than going higher.
mhm,
I very much like seven chords ouds.
mhm,
So um, it's I don't know. Maybe somebody has made a statistic or so, but I think in 100 years ago, actually quite a proportion of the ouds that were played were seven chord instruments. I think it was a lot more common then than it is now.
mhm.
But I'm not sure. It would be interesting to investigate.
Yeah.
And and the reason why I like it is if you extend the tonal range
Mhm.
in the bass. I just like the tonal space which is created by that. It's just there is uh, yeah, it's simply a bit vaster, and I like that. Of
Mhm.
course, there are other ways to do it. For example, if you use that Turkish tuning, where you only use pure fourths
Mhm.
all the way down, then
Mhm.
of course you also end up with a greater tonal range, which is attractive.
Mhm.
And it's it's all about what you want to do. A problem when you have more strings in Ouds always is that you have too many resonances from the strings,
Mhm.
and in the worst case you might end up with more damping
Mhm.
than with actually playing,
Mhm.
or you get intonation problems if you have
Mhm.
from the open strings, if you have too many pure overtones, but you need a coron in a certain makam,
Mhm.
then it might sound strange, or you have a problem and you need to dampen that strings, and that can make things complicated.
Exactly. Yeah.
What what I came up with is I can show you here in this wood. Um, what I made is it has 12 strings. It's not. It starts with a C as a highest string,
Mhm.
and then it goes down. And currently, the lowest string is an A,
Mhm.
and 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 that's it's not tuned now, but
Yeah.
it's really low.
Mhm.
And but as you can see, I left the two basses single,
Mhm.
but it allows actually you can string it any way you like. You can have the this bass, you can have it as a double string,
Yeah.
and then you have 13 strings, which most seven chords ouds have.
Mhm.
But you can leave it like this, which I think works fine to have two single basses.
Mhm.
Or you could also extend it in the treble,
Mhm.
have a high F or whatever string you like, and have the rest in the normal tuning.
Mhm.
So I'm always in favor of creating as many possibilities for the musician on every level.
Mhm.
In the end, it should be a tool for the musician to express
Mhm.
him or herself, and and in the best case, which I hope my instruments are, an inspiration to the musician,
Mhm.
and sometimes to to be completely honest,
Mhm.
also a challenge,
Mhm.
because this is it's just inevitable. If you
Mhm.
create an instrument which gives the musician a lot of possibilities to shape the sound,
Yeah.
it also means the musician has to control these possibilities.
Exactly.
It's like a I sometimes use a comparison with a racing car.
Mhm.
Uh, it's like if you have a racing car which is really built for maximum performance, and and somebody sits in the car who just learned to drive,
Mhm.
be very careful to put his foot on the accelerator because he just might lose control.
Yeah.
And well, there are many examples. A nicer one is maybe with a really good horse or something, a sensitive horse.
Mhm.
And if you don't know what you're doing, you can easily lose control, and things can get ugly. The same, of course, is the case with a good instrument.
Mhm.
If it's capable of a lot of different sounds, you have to control it. You have to know what you're doing. So that's another definition I would give to what a good instrument is.
Hmm.
That it's both an inspiration and a challenge to the musician.
Interesting.
But it should not be, when I say challenge, it should really be with a challenge what makes the musician happy, that he sees, okay, wow,
Yeah.
here are new fields to explore, new ways to go, and that requires, of course, a willingness to
Mm.
develop and and
Mhm.
to go further.
Can we call that responsiveness? I mean, interactivity
Uh,
between the musician and a great instrument.
yes, that's how I might define it. I
Mm.
always find it very difficult. This word responsiveness
Mm.
is used a lot,
Mm.
and and I think everybody has a vague idea what it means.
Mm.
But when you ask people what do you mean exactly by that,
Mhm.
it seems very difficult to define it. But that is. Uh, Actually, I rather try to avoid that word because of that,
Mhm.
even though it does mean something to me, of course.
Mhm.
But
Interesting.
I coined the term of modulation capacity.
Mm.
Sounds a bit cumbersome, maybe, but with what I mean by modulation capacity is the extent to which the instrument allows the musician to shape, to form the
Mm.
sound.
I really like what you are doing now, Sebastian. This practical philosophy, down to earth philosophy. I really like that. And the last part of the previous question, which is the sometimes, received suggestions from somebody who requests an oud, saying, I'd like this material, or let's change the measurement to this and that. All these suggestions are there, and luthiers have to just be patient with them. What is your take, or maybe the way you receive these kind of
Um, well,
requests? Yeah.
my take is that, as I said, I really see it as an addition to the process,
Mm.
but it has to work, of course.
Hmm.
There are lots of things which I simply would refuse to do,
Hmm.
and but if it's I actually once have written that in a
Mm.
contract that I'm willing to oblige
Hmm.
as long as I can align it with my concept of both aesthetics and acoustics. But I just can't do something which in my opinion is either ugly or doesn't make any sense.
Interesting.
And
Yeah.
and so if my customer and me, if we come to an agreement, it, it works.
Hmm.
But there have been several cases where I really sent people to a colleague of mine
Hmm.
and suggesting that telling them I really believe, look at this guy, talk to him. I think you will get something which is more like what you're looking for.
Hmm.
And it's I mean, I wouldn't be happy to make an instrument which which neither I like
Hmm.
nor my customer is happy with in the end. And I'm sure I couldn't make him happy if I do something I don't like. So
Hmm.
it just has to fit. It has to work together.
Interesting.
But if if that uh, um, if that is the case, there are sometimes negotiations going on. For example, I once had the situation somebody wanted an oud with a 61 centimeter scale length.
Hmm.
And well, I managed to negotiate him down to 60 centimeter.
Mhm.
And now he agrees with me that it's still too large, but
Mhm.
uh, uh, I can do that, of course.
Mhm.
But of for example, for Mustafa, I made 57 centimeter scalings because I know that's his preferred one.
Mhm.
So there's no problem to oblige in such things.
Mhm.
And but my basic thing is it has to somehow fit with my basic ideas about sound and about aesthetics.
Mhm.
If it's something completely different, I don't think it would make sense. It's better to find another maker who is building such things.
Interesting. Two last questions about instruments and your
Yeah,
roots. About strings and picks. You have for sure seen a great exposure of plucked instruments. What is a good pick and what is a good instrument for such roots? I'm not talking about brands here.
yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, I wish I knew. I mean, the pick, the Risha or Misrab
Hmm.
is, I think it's the most personal thing, really. It has to fit with your style of playing and the sound you want to achieve.
Hmm.
And um, I make my own picks
Hmm.
with mostly from buffalo horn,
Hmm.
and and it's I like to use a medium to have a medium stiffness, not too firm, but not like this rubbery style of picks many Turkish player use.
Hmm.
I for me that just doesn't work. But maybe it's just a style I never learned,
Hmm.
and I think there is no rule you could give what is the best or the right, even with the material.
Exactly.
There is, uh, for example, uh, what's his name? Um, ah, Nihat Al Sayed. Sorry,
Hmm.
my
Yeah.
brain is getting a bit slow. Nihat Al Sayed, Egyptian oud player who lives in Switzerland.
Hmm.
I think he started to produce picks from polycarbonate,
Hmm.
which I found very good, giving very good sound. And he said he wanted to make different thicknesses,
Hmm.
and so that should be work very well. I don't know how I have to ask about it, but how, if this is already available or not.
Uh-huh.
And and there are uh, well, the eagle feather is simply no issue because you simply can't buy it or any way. Or
Hmm.
I think most eagle feathers traded are illegal anyway, and
Hmm.
there are not so many eagles in the first place. And if you go by the tradition, it must be one of the outer feathers from the wing,
Hmm.
and it must have been lost. It mustn't have been obtained by force. So
Hmm.
how many such feathers you can get? So it's
Yeah.
but it is a fascinating material. There's no doubt
Mm.
about that.
Mm.
Mm. And
Strings.
well, about strings, it's um, again, it's I always say it's three things which have to be in balance.
Mm.
It's the soundboard, the strings, and the hand of the player.
Mm.
And so you also you can't say what is the best string. It really has to depend on both the instrument and the player.
Hmm.
And I use the Savarus lute strings, which are unfortunately the most expensive ones also, but they are uh, they give the most alive sound. So
Mhm.
And for the treble strings, I mostly use the fluorocarbon strings, where I either use Kirschner, for example, or I use the fishing, different brands of fishing line from I think they're made in Taiwan or Japan,
Mhm.
and you can get thickness. Typically, I use the 0.66 for
Mhm.
the G second course, and 52 or 54 for the C,
Mhm.
and that some of them work really great, but I think that's unfortunately a process of trial and error every
Mhm.
musician has to go through
Mhm.
to find what works for him and what sound he likes. There's no possibility to say, okay, this is
Mhm.
what you have to use. When you have um, a bit of experience, or you know someone, that's actually the best. If you know someone who has a bit of experience with different strings, you can ask, what would you recommend to put on this oud?
Mhm.
And that's usually a good place to start with.
Yeah, so you shortcut the thing instead of,
Right,
yeah,
instead of,
utilizing too much time and too
yeah,
much cost.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
You see, for
Mm.
example, I also very much like the lute strings from Pyramid,
Mhm.
but I would say they are a bit more German, you could say, than the Savara strings.
Mm.
And but for some instruments, recently a customer of mine, he put the Pyramid
Mm.
on the oud, and I actually liked it better than the Savaras,
Uh-huh.
because the oud was so alive in itself. It was so explosive and alive that it felt like, okay, this is like
Convincing.
calming the horse a bit down, yeah. And
Interesting. Sebastian, we really talk a good time from your day, but let's conclude with a few questions remaining, if you allow me.
yes, of course.
I would like to just talk about your experience with Albert Mansour. Just because we mentioned in the beginning,
Yeah,
it's good to, yeah.
yeah, that is another story,
Mm.
which is why I say I always felt like my work was under a lucky star,
Hmm.
and I can't talk about Albert without explaining how I met Mustafa Said, because he introduced me to Albert,
Yeah.
and that was actually that when I made this very first oud for the man who lived in the same village, and accidentally, and uh, uh, this man, he took part in a workshop in Mannheim
Hmm.
2 years later, when after I finished his oud. I think that must have been in 2013,
Hmm.
and Mustafa liked the oud very much, and he asked to try it, and then he asked who made it,
Hmm.
and of course he had never heard my name,
Hmm.
and then Mustafa said, well, I don't know who this guy is, but he has the potential to make the best ouds in the world,
Hmm.
and please tell him if he wants, he may contact me, and I can give him recommendations what could be improved.
Hmm.
And when the owner of the oud told me, uh, gave me Mustafa's regard, and told me the story, I was extremely happy, of course,
Hmm.
and and I got in touch with Mustafa, and we tried to arrange a meeting, which then happened about a year later, when he was playing a concert and giving masterclass,
Hmm.
not far from the place where I lived.
Uh-huh.
and so we met, and we liked each other immediately, very much, and it was he had two Ouds from Albert Mansour with him,
Mm-hmm.
and that was for me a revelation, because these were the Ouds I had been searching for when I was trying to find a model uh, uh, to use for my own instrument, something to start with and to go by.
Mm-hmm.
We come back to copying. Of course, there
Mm-hmm.
always is an element of copying as well. You
Yeah.
see what has been done before you and what are the others doing.
Mm-hmm.
And I could immediately see that Albert and I had some ideas in common
Mm-hmm.
about the oud shape and looks, and he also, most of his ouds only have one sound hole, and so I was very happy to see these ouds.
Mm-hmm.
And then Mustafa told me that Albert was always having difficulties to find good spruce for his soundboards.
Mm-hmm.
And then I said, well, I could help. I'm practically living near the source.
Mm-hmm.
And I asked if he was still there the next day. And so the next day I came back and brought him a few soundboards to take with him to Beirut.
Uh-huh.
And he invited me to visit him in Lebanon. But a few weeks later, we met again when he was teaching in Mannheim.
Mm-hmm.
And I again brought him some soundboards to take to Albert. And he insisted on me coming to Lebanon. And I said, yeah, I really would like to soon. And when I come, I will bring a soundboard full of wood
Mm-hmm.
to bring to Albert.
Yeah.
And that's what I did about half a year later or so. And I was very anxious, I have to say, to meet him, because I was well aware that there is an aspect in instrument making, uh, this chain I mentioned earlier.
Mm-hmm.
There is something you could call a lineage.
Mm-hmm.
Is it lineage or lineage? Lineage,
Yeah.
I guess. I never know.
Mm-hmm.
And of tradition.
Yeah.
And I felt that in my guitar making. I was taught in Munich, and Munich has been a capital of instrument making in Europe, and especially of guitar making. And there was a long standing tradition of which I was a part.
Mm-hmm.
But I was well aware that I was lacking this in oud making. And so I was secretly, you could say, hoping to somehow connect to a lineage in oud making.
Mm-hmm.
And with this idea in mind, I also came to Lebanon and was very happy to meet an oud maker who no doubt is standing in such a tradition.
Mm-hmm.
And and with Albert, it was we went to his workshop straight from the airport,
Mm-hmm.
and it was also really friendship on first sight. We
Mm-hmm.
just, I think, liked each other a lot,
Mm-hmm.
and and when I left, uh, uh, I know, I think it was the next day. I'm not sure anymore.
Mm-hmm.
We came back to his workshop, and then he said, Sebastian, while you're here, why don't you work with me?
Mm-hmm.
And then I was at his workshop without Mustafa. Then now when I came back to Mustafa, I told him, sorry, the tourist program is canceled. I have to work. Because we had made plans to go to the beach, to go to the cedar
Yeah.
trees, to go here and there,
Yes. Yeah.
but I said no, sorry, cancelled. I have to work.
Mhm.
And so um, I spent most of the. It was only a week this first trip to Lebanon, and I
Mhm.
spent most of the time in Albert's workshop,
Mhm.
and and yeah, it was just great spending that time with him,
Mhm.
and and uh, and well, as far as I was kind of hoping to get his blessings
Mhm.
for wood making, to
Mhm.
become part of such a lineage.
Mhm.
And when I was sitting in the plane going back to Germany, I just thought, boy, did you get that blessing? Because it was really, it was not, didn't feel like he gave it to me. It was really like he showered me with it.
Mhm.
And he's such a wonderful person and so loving and generous, and which also reflects in his instruments, of course.
Yeah.
And so we became really good friends, and kept exchanging messages and pictures of what we were working on, what we were doing, and exchanging our ideas. And then one day he said, well, why don't you come next year and we make an oud together?
Wow.
And then I said, that's a lovely idea. And
Mhm.
and 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 we started planning and preparing. And when Mustafa heard about that idea,
Mhm.
he immediately said, I want to have this oud. It's mine. And he asked for actually some specifications.
Yeah.
That another story. I hope I can tell it correctly. That
Mhm.
uh, he asked for the oud to be made, the bowl to be made from paduk,
Mhm.
and for the fingerboard to be from ivory.
Mhm.
The story is that when he was a 12-year-old boy, I believe,
Mhm.
uh, he the oud Muhammad al-Kausabji played
Yeah.
most of the time
Mhm.
was auctioned in Cairo,
Mhm.
and it was uh, uh, displayed for people to look and try before making a bid.
Mhm.
So Mustafa went there and played it, and he told me it was told for something like 200. It was auctioned for something of $200 or something like that.
Mhm.
And he said at the time he couldn't have paid $2 even. He was a blind, poor kid
Mhm.
living in the streets of Cairo, basically.
Mhm.
But he said it's two things stayed in his memory. One was a sound,
Mhm.
and one was the touch, the feel of this fingerboard.
Mhm.
And so, well, you know Mustafa, so you know there was no other way than obliging.
Mhm.
And
Yeah.
and I said, okay, I'll get you an ivory fingerboard, but I'll do that only once.
Mhm.
It has to be from old stock. I
Mhm.
don't want any elephant to die for it.
Mhm.
And actually, there is here in Germany there are still, most people don't know, but there are still tons
Mhm.
of old ivory because it was imported in really big quantities before the time of plastics.
Mhm.
And there is a lot of items which later were made of plastic, or what was the name of this very earliest, well, doesn't matter.
Mhm.
Uh, they used ivory for that.
Mhm.
And and from that stock from the last, or actually before last century, there
Mhm.
still is a lot there.
Mhm.
And so I bought some and got it, a CITES certificate for it, that it's old and legal and all that.
Yeah.
and prepared the ribs and a lot of material uh, for this oud, and then traveled to Beirut
Mm-hmm.
and for 2 weeks, and we built that oud, and
Wow. Mm.
we managed to finish it. It was my, my 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 flight back to Germany left. We had to leave for the airport at 4 in the morning,
Mm-hmm.
and till 2 in the night I was still working last touches on the varnish.
Wow.
But
Yeah, I have seen that oud release. So great, and the sound is so unique.
thank you very
Yeah.
much. It's really a very unique instrument,
Mm.
and I would say that it's an instrument which really reflects both Albert Mansour's and my own work and ideas. I
Mm.
don't think uh, either of us could have built it alone.
Mm-hmm.
It's really a wonderful example of a cooperation of two instrument makers,
Mm.
which is quite a rare thing actually in
Yeah,
music.
and that's the lineage and the blessing.
Yeah, it is a great blessing to have met him and to know him and be his
Hmm.
friend. Certainly is.
Very interesting, really. Sebastian, we talked about Dawood and the flexibility and giving the musician a challenge, but a little comment or maybe elaboration into considering the intended culture that Dawood will be played in, right? The
Mm.
music that will for sure bring the tuning, how many instruments, the intervals between the strings, uh, and maybe you have highlighted a bit about two single stringed
Mm.
bass notes. So a little bit of elaboration into this part, considering the culture, the target culture.
Uh, well, that's a very interesting question,
Mm,
and I doubt that I can say much about it because I think there are a lot of people who could
mhm,
say more interesting things about that topic. But
mhm,
um, generally, I believe the best days for the oud might still come.
mhm,
They might still be ahead of us,
mhm,
and I only hope that the musical culture of the East, or the so-called East,
mhm,
is surviving, and not only surviving but actually developing and growing,
mhm,
and being appreciated more and more. I find it very sad to see musicians coming from an Oriental background
mhm,
losing their musical cultures when they come to Western countries,
mhm,
which unfortunately happens a lot. And it's quite obvious why it happens, because when they start playing with Western musicians, very often in the field of jazz,
mhm,
these musicians they don't have the understanding of modal music,
mhm,
and and um, and so I think it really needs an effort to to create a greater awareness in the West for the beauty of modal music, for this,
mhm,
from the Western perspective, other world of music, you could say.
mhm,
I think it's really like two worlds: this melodic
mhm.
world of
Yeah.
modal music, you could say, and the harmonic world. Even though there are some attempts to merge them, and to some extent that is very interesting, but obviously in the end it's not really possible.
Yeah.
But it's I think all will depend on how much uh, uh, the modal music can survive in the modern world.
Mhm.
And because uh, let me say it the other way around.
Mhm.
I think the classical guitar would have never been a successful instrument without the introduction of equal temperament in Western music.
Mhm.
In the early 19th century, most of the musicians were not willing to accept equal temperament as to play music in.
Mhm.
And, and that means fixed frets were no option.
Mhm.
So the very concept of a guitar, I mean, guitars did exist, of course,
Mhm.
but they were by the professional musicians not taken seriously as a musical instrument, probably mainly because of being forced to some kind of equal temperament.
Mhm.
And and with the rise of the equal temperament, it was no issue anymore, and the guitar could become very successful.
Mhm.
There was, in fact, then there were several hypes, especially in Austria. The guitar was so popular that Franz Schubert, for example, he published many of his songs, the compositions where he wrote music for poems,
Yeah.
songs.
Mhm.
He published them first for the guitar and only later handed in a piano version.
Uh-huh.
And that shows how popular the guitar was in that time.
Mm.
But I think that was only possible with the acceptance of equal temperament.
Mm.
So, uh, uh, what I'm saying is the same might happen the other way. The oud might be endangered, or any such instruments might be endangered of extinction if modal music disappears.
Mhm.
And so, in my opinion, all possible support should be should be given to the education in that music, and
Mhm.
and I think that's very important.
Mhm.
And I mean, there are some places, some people who are doing that. The Labyrinth musical workshops from Ross Daly is a
Yeah.
very great example. I think it's
Mhm.
can't be overestimated what he has done there for the survival of modal music.
Mhm.
And of course people like Mustafa Said or so, who are not only great musicians but also great musicologists,
Mhm.
Oniga Buban for that matter.
Yeah.
And I hope that their work is perceived and also taken up by the musician.
Mhm.
But uh, um, well, actually reminds me of a very sarcastic joke Mustafa once made,
Mhm.
saying that the problem is we have more oud players than audience.
Mhm. Yeah.
And that there is some truth in it too, of
Mm.
course. So it's like with shopping. We have there's a lot of power in the consumer.
Mhm.
So if the audience is there, then these musicians can survive. If
Mhm.
if it isn't, it is bound to die sooner or later, and I hope it won't.
Yeah.
But I want to think positive, and I really think that the best days for the oud are yet to come.
Yeah. I think this music is being more appreciated now with the efforts you mentioned and the efforts of many others that maybe are limited to a certain culture or inside
Yeah,
cultures, like not being seen by different cultures, like in Europe or in the States. But I agree, like there is a lot of efforts to come, and maybe greater days of Oud to come.
Yeah.
Sebastian, what are the future projects and challenges you are working on?
Oh, there are several. Actually, one project I have in mind for quite some time now,
Mm-hmm.
for exactly that purpose, is I
Mm,
want to make a or I would like to make a tour
mm,
with a concert lecture
mm,
with under the working title "Meet the Oud,"
mm-hmm.
which aims to make the oud more known to the Western audience.
Mm-hmm.
Because here simply there are still many people as I did in the beginning, who have no idea what it is.
Yeah.
And 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 for example, from my guitar customers, I regularly hear that, oh, you also make ouds. This is such a wonderful instrument, and I would like to try it or play it, but I have no idea how and where and when.
Mm-hmm.
And and so that's what I encounter. I encounter a lot of interest, a lot of openness in people,
Mm-hmm.
but they don't know where to connect. So I would like to create possibilities of a low threshold, as it were,
Mm-hmm.
uh, situations for people to learn about the oud, to learn about the cultures it comes from and the
Mm-hmm.
music it's used in, and its history,
Mm-hmm.
and also its connection with European culture and history. And
Yeah. Closing the circle again.
right, right, and so that's one of the projects.
Mm-hmm.
Is another project is I'm I'm hoping to uh, find a way to make affordable but good student ouds available for people,
Mm-hmm.
because that is also a big problem here.
Mm-hmm.
There are many people, also from immigrants, who would like to have their children learn the oud, or something, but they don't know where to buy one.
Mm-hmm.
And it's still very difficult. It's not as difficult as it was when I tried to buy an oud in Germany, but it's still difficult. So I'm hoping to cooperate with oud makers in the Middle East,
Mm-hmm.
and connect them with dealers here to
Mm-hmm.
make affordable but good ouds available on to European players,
Mm-hmm.
especially students and children and learners, and because it would be a pity if somebody is not learning the oud because he don't know where to get an instrument from, or
Mm-hmm.
he can't afford one,
Mm-hmm.
or the one he buys is so bad that he loses all joy in playing it.
Mm-hmm.
And actually, I think it's very important that for beginners, they have at least a decent sounding instrument.
Mm-hmm.
It's very wrong to think it doesn't matter with a beginner.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, a beginner also has ears and hears and enjoys nice sound. It has
Exactly.
nothing to do with technical capabilities.
Mm-hmm.
It's very wrong to give him a bad instrument.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's another project. And still another project is um, I don't want to talk about the details now because it's really in the middle of some negotiations. But I want to. Uh, um, uh, I invented a new type of wooden packs, which I think is a great improvement.
Mm-hmm.
And I want also to cooperate with dealers and people who can in Germany who can produce it as an affordable price, which I myself can't.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's another project.
Mm-hmm.
And well, basically, I'm very busy with
Mm,
the building the instruments I'm making,
mhm.
and I have more than enough to work to do. So
Yeah, interesting. And more challenges to come, more problems to solve.
there always will be challenges. That's for sure.
Interesting. How are you accessible, Sebastian, to people who would like to see your work or maybe request instruments or maybe collaborate?
Well, thanks for asking. I mean, I have a website, stenzel-guitars.de,
Hmm.
where you can find lots of pictures and some information about my work, and also, of course, possibility to send an email.
Hmm.
And I'm on Facebook, which I don't use a lot,
Hmm.
but there you can also find me. So
Hmm.
it's possible to find me. That's for sure.
Sebastian, I really enjoyed this talk, and it was really a pleasure, and it was really a great opportunity to meet and talk about all these things. And I'm sure we will meet once more in Alnadi for many other things to disclose
Yeah,
and
I would be
enjoy.
very happy to. I also
Yeah,
greatly enjoyed it, and
yeah.
many thanks. It's been an honor to be invited to Alnadi. Really, it's a fantastic project.
Thank you very much, really. You were very generous, really.
So are you. Thank you very much, Father.
Thank you and see you again.
See you again.